In today's video, we do our top 5 Ford engines. Duck's guts. Welcome back to the channel. It's Fred here, and I've got my co-star here, young Frankie. G'day, mate.
G'day, how you going?
Oh, very good. Well, off the back of our last video, young Frankie, we're getting all these requests about top 5 engines and top 5 Fords and all this sort of stuff. So today, we're going to talk to you about your favourite topic, Frankie, and that's Ford engines. So
About time, isn't it?
Oh, I'd say so. Now, look at this little bit of Escort action in the background here. Look at these things. Well, maybe kick us off with what are we talking about, what aren't we talking about?
Well, it's a big subject, isn't it, when you're talking about Ford motors, and we don't want to talk about absolutely everything they made. That would bore people to tears, but we want to talk about motors that you could have possibly got here in Australia, in Australian-built cars.
Well, very good. All right, mate. Well, let's get stuck into it. But before we get into the top 5, we have to tell you some honourable mentions here. So, Frankie, not everyone can make in the top 5, so who didn't make it and why?
Well, you want to talk about the original 4-cylinder that Henry put in the Model T, and that's not a really cool motor. It might have been groundbreaking at the time, but we don't want to talk about that. And of course, they've made a lot of 4-cylinder things, and 4 cylinders aren't really my caper.
No, you seem to be liking this one in the background here, though.
Yeah,
Frankie.
they're good to watch, but I've never owned one, don't want to own one, so
No.
you know, don't go crying in your soup if we don't mention, you know, the little Kent motor that was in the Formula Fords, or the Pinto in the, you know, the Sierra Cosworths, or the Lotus Fords in Cortinas. Just not our thing, and yeah, sorry fellas.
Righto. All right, well, on that note, let's go straight to number 5. All right, Frankie, number 5, and there it is in the background. Tell us about this.
Well, this is the Ford Flathead V8. It was the first production V8, mass production.
Yeah, right.
I think Rolls-Royce had dabbled with the V8, made 3 of them, and then gave up and went back to a 6-cylinder early in the century. But yeah, 1930s, early 1930s, Ford decided we'd stick a flathead into a normal sedan, so the average guy like you and me could own one. And it was taken up by, of course, Australia and Canada, a couple of other places, and produced it locally and put into local sedans and trucks.
Yeah, right. And I hear that, Frankie, they may have found their way into the odd tank here and there.
Well, I think they tried them in a tank because it was a high volume motor. Didn't have the grunt to power a tank. Only had 65 horsepower, which today we think that's pathetic, and you can get that out of your 3-cylinder Mirage, more or less. But for the day, it was groundbreaking, and all the hot rodders in the 30s, 40s, and 50s here in Australia, that's what they wanted to do. And Ford even made aluminium heads for them.
Oh, jeez.
It took Chevy 20 years to find a mass production V8. That's how far ahead it was. Not that it wasn't without a couple of little problems.
Yeah, well, watching the production process here, Frankie, this is probably the 30s or 40s, I dare say, and primitive looking bits of kit, but I think they sound all right. Nice little idle to them.
Well, they did. They had some overheating problems, and Henry didn't like the idea, I think, at first of running a water pump.
Ooh.
So there's really archaic sort of technology. Back in the day, you used to advance the distributor by a little button on the steering wheel as you were driving along. So, yeah, for what they were, this was a massive leap ahead. Yeah. And if I was a young fella wanting to hot rod something, that's probably what I would have got.
Oh, very good, mate. Excellent. Coming in at number 4. This thing is the one thing that makes Chevy guys like me quake in our boots, and it's the Barra. Frankie.
The Barramundi.
The Barramundi, the Barracuda.
It probably should have been number 1, except for the poor little thing's missing 2 cylinders.
That's it.
But what a thing for Australia to produce. It's unique to our market. So the Yanks didn't get it, and no one in Europe got it.
Yeah. And they're a wild bit of kit, Frankie, and all they need is some oil gears and some billet rods, and you're talking 2,000 horsepower. Gosh,
I've seen some very stout motors that, boy, oh boy, they can put out some power.
That's it.
So, yeah, nothing to be sneezed at. And yeah, if you're a European or a Japanese manufacturer and got a Barra next to you,
look out.
Yeah, I hear that they the engineer for the turbo version called it the gull after the seagull because he was pretty confident he was going to crap on everyone else.
Oh, is that right? Well, if there's one thing I'll say about the Barra, Frankie, not only are they go like a scalded cat, but they sound like arse. I don't know about you, Frankie, but the sound of that 6-cylinder drone, that's just not for me.
That's not for me, but geez, when it slams you in the seat or goes whistling past you. And this is a motor that was produced by Ford Australia out of just existing componentry, a humble old 6-cylinder from the 60s, morphed into the 250 Crossflow, and then that Intech horrible thing in the EL and AU Falcon, and then turned into the Barra, just a giant killer.
Absolutely. Now, Frankie, you've got a little giant killer story with our little mate in a Falcon wagon. Let's go straight to that in a second. So, Frankie, when you pull up to the set of lights with a car seat in the back with little kids in a Barra swapped wagon, you blow the doors off a dunny door. What happened?
Yeah, well, I helped a mate, Reese, put a Barra motor out of a XR6 Turbo into his poverty pack BA wagon, and just had a set of alloys on it. He's got the car seats in the back, and a couple of young fellas pull up in their HSV. I think that was a VY or a VZ, and I'm pretty confident they were going to give this bloke a bit of a run. And yeah, it had nearly 400 kilowatts, and sort of marched away from them sideways with the kids giggling in the back seat. So yeah, that's pretty embarrassing for us V8 blokes.
It is, yeah. Well, there's one thing that worries us at Gentech, and that's one of these Barras turns up on dyno day. We run a mile because we had one dyno day, and this thing turned out 610 rear wheel kilowatts, and it was only getting started. They are mental. Well, Frankie, we're getting into the top 3 territory. This is privileged ground here. Tell us what's coming in at number 3.
Well, there's a lot of followers for the mighty Windsor, although some people do call it the Weezer, and hadn't had the best heads of any Ford, and we'll get on to what did have the best heads a little later on. But yeah, it was the first V8 to win Bathurst, and they put it in this little XR GT Falcon.
67?
67, I'm pretty sure it was a Bathurst winner. Before that, everyone said it wasn't a V8 track. They were too heavy on fuel, and the cars were too big and broke. And yeah, cleaned them up, which was great.
Right. I remember those, and there's been a few street machines done up in this XR GT format. I think even Chris Christo's son may have done up one from memory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Sweet little motor, and then it went on to the XY, and they had a 351 Windsor in their GTHO, which is this car.
That's the XW, isn't it?
XW, sorry.
Yep.
You're dead right there.
That's all right. Yeah. They say I'm a Holden man, Frankie. But...
Oh, I know. Yeah, halfway through the XW year, they transferred over to Cleveland, but initially the GTHO and GT Falcons came out with a 351 Windsor.
Wow. And quite a few trucks, because they're pretty torquey V8, weren't they, come out with a Windsor motor?
Yeah, well, they put it in just about everything, didn't they?
Yeah.
But here in Australia, you'd think after the XW, that was going to be the end of Windsor for you, wouldn't you? But no.
Back to the future, Frankie. EB?
Yeah, EB Falcon. Ford comes back from the wilderness and brings a V8 back to the Australian, the Falcon, so publicly you and me can buy one. And what a great little motor. They continue on that until 2001 in the AU. And we were the last country in the world still using a Windsor at that stage.
Wow, and the AU's only got a face that only a mother could love, Frankie.
It does, but a great little motor if you love your Windsors, because one of the last, the Tickford, Ford Tickford Experience was a Synergy 5000 motor, which is aluminium heads on it, SVO heads. And then for the last hurrah, they built for the T3 FTE, was a stroker motor, stroker crank ground here in Melbourne, in Australia, and pumped out a very respectable at the time 250 kilowatts.
Yeah, right.
So nice little motor, and it'd be nice to have one of them floating around. There's a couple of pictures of one that I got from. Unfortunately, the Falcon was wrecked, and. Yeah, great little motor. Yeah,
very good. Well, that's number 3, Frankie, and etched in American and Australian folklore and the number of engine units that are out there. Good choice. Also, Frankie, coming in at number 2, you've got your own little daily driver here, your BA. Tell us all about this motor. What is it?
Yeah, well, while Ford was mucking around with Windsors in the US, they built a modular motor, which is an all-aluminium under 5 litre motor. And Ford decided in Australia we needed a cast iron block, slightly larger capacity, so 5.4 litre modular, and they called it the Boss.
Well, this is it here. There's a Boss 290, your little edition here, Frankie.
Yeah, the GT got the 290 and the XR8 got a 270 version.
Oh.
And quite a large, complicated motor, four cams and as many valves as any four-cylinder Mitsubishi I've ever seen.
That's right. Yeah, well, look at the size of the heads on them too, Frankie. They're massive heads on them.
They certainly are. It's a big donk and very tall and wide. So, originally 290, but later on in the series they went up to 302 kilowatts, and I think that was just by raising the compression ratio. And then by the end of FG, the Boss motor had gone up to 315 kilowatts.
Oh, okay.
So after that, they went an evolution of this to the Coyote in the US, which is a normally aspirated motor, went down to 5 litres, and good old Ford Australia thought, well, we don't want to just have the normal Coyote motor, so they built a supercharged version, which they called Miami.
Oh.
And quite a handy little unit at 351 kilowatts. But I think Ford might have just been fudging the figures a little bit there, and it was producing a fair bit more, but they were trying not to upset anyone, including insurance companies or the government.
Right.
And yeah, very handy motor.
Well, I think that Magic 351 is a cubic displacement we'll talk about in a second too, Frank. It's a magic number for you Ford fans.
That's right, and I think they were more interested in a bit of nostalgia rather than having to have an actual horsepower figure. But it must have inspired the guys in the US as well, because then they went for the Shelby to a 5.2 litre motor, which they called the VooDoo, and it was producing just under 400 kilowatts, and they put that in the Shelby Mustang GT350.
Oh.
And later on they made a supercharged version of that, which they called the Predator. And
interesting names here, Frankie.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, for movie buffs maybe, I guess. And, yeah, so it's fairly exotic. They also used a supercharged version of this Boss motor in the Ford GT, and interestingly enough, the Koenigsegg CCR, I think, also got a tuned up version of this Boss motor. So we went in some fairly exotic machinery as well.
Yeah, well, it goes it down on our list as number 2, Frankie. Let's get stuck into number 1. All right, Frankie, number 1, and it's an engine that struck fear in the hearts of us Holden and Chevrolet fans.
It certainly did.
The Clevo.
The Clevo's the was a giant killer. Massive big port heads on these things. They had a small port motor which had bigger heads than the 202 Chevy big port motor. So massive, well designed heads on these things for racing. And it debuted, of course, in the XW.
Right.
GTHO.
351.
Then built a 302 Cleveland, which is unique to Australia, but they didn't bring it in. Even in the XY, you could get a 302 Windsor or a 351 Cleveland.
Right.
A little bit of a mix mash there, but yeah, 302 is a bit of an oddity, and I'm sure people have seen them around. The Johnny Goss special that you've got over there. Is,
yes, the one with the interesting sort of tagline there.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, it's the 302 Cleveland.
Right.
Couldn't find those anywhere else.
There you go.
It was a fantastic motor that Ford Australia used much longer than Ford in the USA. The oil crisis of the 70s really put a damper on the Cleveland in the US, but we stuck with it because that's the sort of people we are.
And firing order and these things used to rev like nobody's business. Frankie, I remember your XA Coupe was renowned for revving over 6.5.
Well, we seemed to make it rev okay, didn't we? And no, it's a great motor. Of course, Australia stuck with it until the early 80s in the XE Falcon, and then of course Ford went off into the wilderness with no V8 in a XF, unfortunately.
This Bathurst and racing heritage, Frankie, let's talk all about it and the magic moments of the mountain. So Frankie, it all started with Alan Moffat in this XW when Bathurst victory.
Yes, as soon as they put the Cleveland in 1970, Alan was able to use it to win, and poor old Peter missed out for a couple of years there.
Yeah. Then
he swaps to the giant killing GTHO Phase 3 XY and won again.
Oh, geez. And
then he goes on in the XA, which is my personal favourite GT. There was an HO version built in a 4-door, but unfortunately it didn't get to the track, and those parts were killed off by the supercar scare. And the parts, I was fortunate enough to get one in an RPO 83 XA GT, and Alan won Bathurst in it. And then good old John Goss,
Yes.
he won it himself in an XA GT.
Oh.
At the poor old XB GT was the car that missed out, and that's where Peter Perfect sort of comes onto the scene and starts
Cleaning
kicking
up.
our butts a little
Yeah.
bit.
Maybe in the Tirana A9X from memory, Frankie.
Well, it wasn't the end of it for the Cleveland, because good old Tricky Dicky comes along with his True Blue Falcon, and we all know about the Rock, and I'm sure that was a Holden supporter just pushing that off into the track, and so that smashed his car up for 1980.
Ooh.
Comes back in 1981, and with the support of the donations he got, and bagged the win. And the greatest Falcon of them all, the Green's Tuff Falcon, unfortunately had a little accident at Forest Elbow and
Yes.
picked the tyre barrier there, and that car probably should have won that year. But unfortunately, that was the end of the day for it. He bodged together a car, and it broke down during the race.
You're lucky to walk away from that Forest Elbow incident, Frankie.
That was a huge echo, and how no one could foresee that was going to happen. It looked like something that you would reasonably assess as a major risk.
Yep.
But that's Australian racing tracks for you.
That's it. And I remember him throwing his helmet down into the ditch after the car in disgust.
Well, at least he was alive to do it, I suppose.
That's it. Very good. All right, Frankie, that's a bit of a wrap here. We're getting a bit cold here. Time for some tofu and some baked beans. What do you reckon?
I reckon. Hopefully we'll upset a few people with our choices, but that's the name of the game, isn't it?
It is, mate. And on this channel, you've got to have an opinion. You've got to be heard. Catch you later.